The city of Detroit is once again mourning the loss of one of its own.
4 officers killed in Detroit.
Pleaded no contest, but mentally ill.
Diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia and bipolar quickly
Why did
followed.
a deputy shoot an unarmed man? Well,
Court records show he was declared bipolar in May of 2016.
He had delusions.
Telling authorities he was hearing voices in his head.
Wouldn't take his medicine and could be dangerous. His family says the mental health system ignored his cries for help to treat his schizophrenia.
It's an epidemic of people with mental illness winding up in the justice system.
If you're the parent of an adult child, 18 or over, who's suffering from a severe mental illness, who has become a danger to themselves or others, you know the agony of having to stand by and watch helplessly as they self-destruct. Or if you're an adult child of an aging parent with a mental illness who forgets or refuses to take vital medication, until recently you were powerless to help because legally your hands were tied. Today, there's a law in place that empowers you to help mentally ill adults whom you care about who can no longer help themselves. Kevin's Law, Michigan's version of Assisted Outpatient Treatment, or AOT, is your law. Kevin's Law saves lives. Welcome to My Healthy Mind. I'm Michael Hunter. Today we're discussing Kevin's Law, a major breakthrough in legal protection for severely mentally ill adults. We're here with our esteemed experts, Kevin Fisher from the National Alliance on Mental Illness, Judge Milton Mack, State Court Administrator, and Jerry Clayton, Washtenaw County Sheriff. Welcome, gentlemen, and thank you for joining us on My Healthy Mind.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Fisher, Judge Mack, Sheriff Clayton. You each come from a different aspect of this important legislation, the judicial, the clinical, and the law enforcement. So with all of that coming together, and it had to come together in order to craft and execute this law so that it was both practical and sensitive to the concerns of the mentally ill and their caregivers or their families. So why don't you start with telling us what is Kevin's Law and why it's so important to us?
Well, Kevin's Law is actually Michigan's version of assisted outpatient treatment. So we want to think of it as assisted outpatient treatment, or AOT. And think of assisted outpatient treatment as court-ordered treatment in the community. That's really what it is. And Kevin's Law is designed to permit courts to order treatment in the community as opposed to in the hospital. The theory is that you can get people treatment earlier in the course of their illness and then help them recover and avoid hospitalization. It's named after Kevin Heisinger. Kevin was a student at the University of Michigan who was beaten to death in a bus station in Kalamazoo by a patient who had untreated mental illness, who had been fine when he was on his medication but cycled in and out of mental hospitals. And at the time he was off his medication. So the promise of Kevin's Law at the time, back in 2004, was that you wouldn't have to wait for someone to get in trouble before they got treatment. And when they got treatment, it could be outpatient treatment, not hospitalization. The problem was, as Kevin knows, the bill as written didn't work. So we worked together with the legislature and Lieutenant Governor Calley 2 or 3 years ago to get the law changed. And so now the doors are open and assisted outpatient treatment is now more regularly available to the people of Michigan.
And now that it is more readily available, why is it so important? And why is it important that people know that it exists?
Well, it's so important because, one, not enough people know it exists. Not only within the community mental health or judicial system is it not well known, but specifically to the general public, to family members and caregivers. They're not aware that this is one of many tools available that can help someone, as Judge Mack mentioned, before they get into trouble, before they end up in the criminal justice system, and before they potentially harm themselves or others.
And Sheriff, you see people that are mentally ill and they get arrested. Has Kevin's Law come across your desk or your officer's desk a number of times?
Yeah, I mean,
really the thing that really stands out is the fact that, and why this is so important, are the times that Kevin law isn't enacted in the community. And as a result of that, people deteriorate, they have behavior that panics others, they call 911, and then we show up. And then that person ends up in the system. We have to interact with them. And with Kevin's law, the way we're looking at it in Washington County and the way it's being utilized, we're starting to see examples when we are contacting people more upstream. We're being a lot more proactive, family members contacting the right authorities, getting a person evaluated, working with the courts. And so now we're starting to see instances where we're not called because they're getting their issues addressed really upstream, and that's helpful.
And Kevin, with the number of people that you interact with from the mental health side, the clinical side of this thing, how do families feel Kevin's law is helping them or is important to them? And in this context, the person needs to go and get help, and I don't want to call the police, so what do I do?
So a parent or even spouse can recognize that their loved one does not understand their need for mental health treatment, and they can go to probate court and petition under Kevin's law for that person to be evaluated and get the help that they need. So they don't have to interact with the criminal justice system first. If you recognize a need, then you can start the process right from home.
And while you're in probate court, where's my loved one that I'm concerned about?
Well, it really depends. So currently what would happen is you go to probate court, you tell the judge, well, my son does not understand his need for treatment, and I'm concerned that there's a risk of harm here. And then that judge will sign an order, and the son will be picked up by the police, taken to a screening center. They'll do an assessment whether he meets the standards under the statute, and then the matter will be set for hearing in front of a judge. And then the person will have to wait in the hospital at this time until the order for outpatient treatment is entered. That takes about a week. But then there's the opportunity during that period of time for the person to agree to a voluntary outpatient treatment order and avoid further hospitalization. So what we're trying to do is get that outpatient treatment order entered sooner than later, spend less time in the hospital.
And Sheriff Clayton, when a person that is picked up gets into the system, because now they've already been in, they can still benefit from Kevin's law, correct?
Sure. So in our institution, so we pick someone up and they end up in our jail. We do an initial assessment. So we look at there are two dimensions. We look at risk and need, and we have defined risk as the level of dangerousness they pose to themselves and others, and need, we look at the physiological or psychological requirement for well-being. And we understand you have to address both. So we ask a few questions in screening. If we identify a person, they self-report that they've had mental health issues, or we know in their records that they're a customer of CMH, then we refer them to our community of mental health, which we contract with them to provide mental health services. From that point, they'll do an assessment, and then they will communicate that information to the court. So that person may end up in the jail, but they may then get redirected to the court, and then they can get ordered to that outpatient treatment. If we also identify that the risk level is not high. Because the balance we want to make sure is that that person gets treated, but we want to do it in a way where there's no additional risk to themselves and the community. So we have to look at both of those dimensions.
Well, if they are petitioned under Kevin's law, either from if they've been incarcerated or even from a family member, a case manager is assigned. And so we don't leave it up to the individual to their own devices to say, yes, I'll participate in my treatment plan, yes, I'll take my medication. There is a case manager who monitors that and reports back to the court if I am participating as required or requested. And if I'm not, then the court can take other actions to ensure that I participate in my treatment plan.
When we come back after our break, we'll talk a little bit more about how AOT is helping our neighbors and what to expect with the future of Kevin's law. Stay tuned.
Stress, depression, and severe mental illness can happen to anyone. Team Wellness Center has been helping those struggling with these conditions in southeastern Michigan.
They get a chance to know that somebody's on their team.
We think nobody else feels the pain that we feel. We feel like I'm the only one, but that is so untrue.
Within 24 hours of reaching out to our team, members receive psychiatric evaluations and begin the necessary treatment for recovery.
Working through my problems and seeing that I'm not the only one that has to cope has really brought me to a place where now it's okay to talk about it.
Because if you keep stuff to yourself, you can't overcome. We all need one another.
Team Wellness Center. You are not alone.
We're talking about Kevin's Law, or Assisted Outpatient Treatment, AOT, and the benefits for the people that we're serving with a mental illness and their caregivers. What is the litmus test from the layperson to make a decision, hey, we may want to use AOT for this loved one?
So for me, in my personal experience with my son, Dominique never threatened suicide to me personally. However, I had a grave concern. I watched his mental state deteriorate, and I observed the fact that he did not understand his need for ongoing treatment, that he began to self-medicate, and that he was deteriorating at a rapid pace to the point that I was concerned enough to go to his doctor at the time and say, look, I am afraid that I'm going to lose my son, that he is going to harm himself. And for me, that was enough.
And I can say that as a probate judge, hearing Kevin testify, that'll be enough for me to be convinced that this is a person who presents a substantial risk of harm. That's enough.
What about saturation? How do we train law enforcement officers, other officers of the court, mental health professionals about Kevin's Law?
Well, I do that as state court administrator.
And I'm working on it from the public side. For example, we just created a public service announcement that we want to air as soon as possible. So not only members of the judicial system or law enforcement are aware of it, but we want the general public to be aware of it, because again, the idea is to help someone before they reach a critical need. So that's one perspective, is making it available, aware to the public, and making sure that everyone understands that this is state law. It is not optional. It is available to everyone in the state of Michigan.
And if a person needs it and your officers are unaware, do you see plans in the future for law enforcement learning about Kevin's Law?
So we do there's a 2-day program, Managing Mental Health Crisis Program, that's been developed in the state of Michigan, that we're now in the process of a full statewide immersion to. It's not CIT, which is crisis intervention training, which is at a higher level. We think all police officers should have a basic understanding of how to manage a mental health crisis. And within that curriculum, the conversations about Kevin's Law, the AOT, understanding what it is, also understanding how to communicate it to family members. And here's why it's so important, and I'll try to make this a short story. I received a video from my staff about 18 months ago. Routinely, they'll send me body cam video of incidents. And this body cam video was of a young man who had, we got a 911 call that he allegedly assaulted his mother and his sister. And he had left the house by the time our deputies had arrived. The video picks up with our deputies trying to communicate with him while he's walking down a major street. He has a knife in his hand, he's yelling all sorts of things, back and forth. Our deputies are trying to calm him down, trying all the de-escalation tactics. Several deputies show up and they're following him, they're creating space, they're doing all the things we want them to do in terms of not rushing in and trying to take control of the situation. Well, at the end of this situation, because it got into a populated area, we had to tase him a couple times. We took him into custody. He was safe. The deputies were safe. But here's what we found out. Once he got into the jail, we went into our records and looked at his name. He had had 18 prior contacts with law enforcement. He had allegedly assaulted his mother and his sister several times before that, and then we found out he was a community mental health client. And what it signaled to us was, I was pleased with the fact that our deputies handled it the right way, but it could have easily been a situation that we've seen nationally where law enforcement gets called, and as a result of that, that person ended up severely injured or dies. So what it triggered for us is we not only have to train our staff, but we have to train the community. So now going back to that mother and that daughter, telling them about AOT and saying, here is something that you can use if you start to see your son or your brother start to deteriorate. Here's the path that you can follow.
And that linkage between the police and community mental health is critical.
Yes.
We just learned that in Wayne County in 2017, there were about 21,000 people who spent time in the Wayne County Jail. 10,000 of those people had a case history with community mental health. The other 11,000, many of them will have a case history with community mental health in the future. So being able to identify that's important. And you think about how that case was handled versus the case of Timothy Suter. And you may remember that case. Timothy Suter was, had a mental illness. He did some shoplifting, a couple of paint guns, and threatened the employees of the store with a pocket knife. Went outside, the police showed up, and Timothy said, shoot me, kill me. And he was tased instead. He was taken to jail. He was not taken to a crisis center. No check was made about CMH. He ends up going to prison for 2 years. And while in prison, he doesn't follow the rules because of his mental illness. He's then strapped to a steel table and left to die.
And now it makes sense, as you explain it like that, why we should look at the law as a protection for the severely mentally ill.
Correct.
Because if the family members get in there early, then you can intervene and make sure that 50% of the people incarcerated aren't going to be patients for mental illness.
We should treat mental health like we treat any other illness. You know, if it's cancer, treat it early. If it's mental illness, treat it early. You know, we live in what's called the recovery era, which says that mental illness is treatable, recovery is possible, people with mental illness can live productive lives. But the key is early intervention. If you wait too long, there's too much damage and you can't recover. So, you know, it's really all about protecting people. It's not about taking their rights, it's about restoring their ability to exercise their rights.
Well, and in addition to that, Michael, there is the cost savings that come along with assisted outpatient treatment, because we know, as Judge Mack just mentioned, if half the people incarcerated in the Wayne County Jail have a pre-existing history in the community mental health system, and if we can treat them on an outpatient basis through community mental health rather than in the jail system, we save anywhere from a third of the cost to 10 times the cost of treating someone when they're incarcerated. So for taxpayers and to the community at large and to our legislators, this should ring true to them, that this is an opportunity to save money while we're saving lives and increasing the quality of life for everyone in our community.
The recidivism rate is higher for people with mental illness than for anybody else. Their sentences are longer, spend more time in solitary, higher suicide rates. You can fix that if you provide appropriate mental health treatment at the right time. So when people are being discharged from prison, it should be on an assisted outpatient treatment order.
Well, and for our viewers who may have this concern, to go back to your question, assisted outpatient treatment is not a get out of jail free card. We want the public to understand that. As Judge Mack again indicated, assisted outpatient treatment is really designed to be an intervention program. So it's not after you've been incarcerated specifically for a violent crime, you cannot say, well, I want to be petitioned under Kevin's law so I can get out of jail. It's not a get out of jail free card.
But if the community wraps their mind around, if everybody moves in the same direction around AOT, it can be a prevent you from ending up in jail.
Right, exactly. Right.
That's how we should think about it. The more we can get upstream, zero intercept, work with the community, educate the community, we can identify people who are deteriorating from a mental health standpoint and get that intervention on the front end. First off, it's the right thing to do, but it is the officer and community safety. Every time our staff don't have to respond to a situation where someone's mental health capabilities have deteriorated and that behavior has gotten to the point where it's dangerous for themselves and others. Every time we don't have to do that, that's another situation we have avoided that could be traumatic or disastrous for that person, for the community, or for a law enforcement professional.
Jail and prison just makes it worse.
Yes.
So Kevin, can you tell us a time where you believe Kevin's Law could have worked?
Yes. You know, earlier this year, we tragically lost Officer Glenn Doss of the Detroit Police Department. And one of the things that struck me in that case as I watched the local news coverage was the very first interview I saw with his wife. The very first thing she said was, "My husband is mentally ill. He's not taking his medication. I didn't know how to get him the help that he needed." And immediately, Kevin's Law came to mind. And I think that's an excellent example of where it could have. Of course, we don't know everything that can happen in the future, but I believe had she had knowledge of AOT and its existence and how she could utilize that tool to get help for her husband, we may not have suffered that tragedy.
At Team Wellness Primary Care Center, you will find all the basic services you need to be well and stay well. Come in for all your screenings. Come in for routine physicals and checkups. Come in for full-service dentistry. Come in for vaccinations and immunizations. At Team Wellness Primary Care Center, we take care of your total health. Team Wellness Primary Care Center. Come on in.
Welcome to My Healthy Mind,
a show that dares to talk about mental health matters that touch nearly every family. Each week you'll meet guests who share their stories, hear from local experts, and learn about resources that may help.
And so I was in a committee meeting at the House of Representatives when I realized that my daughter had autism.
We need to take the stigma away from mental health issues.
No topics about mental health and wellness are off limits on our show.
Let's talk about it on My Healthy Mind. We're back with Kevin Fisher of the National Alliance on Mental Illness, Judge Milton Mack, State Court Administrator, and Jerry Clayton, Washtenaw County Sheriff. Judge Mack, can you tell us about some of the outcomes that are positive or negative since Kevin's Law?
Well, I can tell you what the experience is in other states. For example, in New York State, compliance with medication after being in the program is higher, arrests are lower, jail time lower, hospitalization lower. In North Carolina, the actual health care cost went down because there was less hospitalization because people were kept out of the hospital. And I could compare it to court-ordered treatment in our mental health courts. In our Western Regional Court, I can talk about 3 cases. These 3 young people, a young lady with mental illness and substance use disorder, a young man with similar problems, and a second young man. They went in the program, they got court-ordered treatment, and when they got done, they're employed, they're taking the medicine. A couple of them got driver's licenses, got a car, and they graduated and they're successful. A couple of them are peer assistants, so they help other people who got in similar situations. And these are 3 young people whose life was headed in a very bad trajectory, who could just as easily have been in jail or prison. Instead, they have their mental illness under control and they're doing well. There's no reason we can't do more of that.
And Washtenaw County is doing a lot and have some initiatives going on. You want to talk to us about that, Sheriff?
Yeah, so we were fortunate last year. We put a vote in front of the Washtenaw County voters for a public safety mental health millage, an 8-year, 1 mil millage. And I think the people of Washtenaw County need to be congratulated. They overwhelmingly passed it. It was 63% passage. And with those millage dollars, it really positions us to carry forward some of the things that we think, progressive things that we've been doing already. Co-training police officers to how to respond to mental health crises. We contract with community of mental health already in our jail. When someone comes into our jail, as I've mentioned, they get an assessment right up front. And we identify someone with mental health challenges, they're automatically connected with representative of community mental health. They may have already been a client, so they can continue that treatment. If they weren't a previous client, we start that process. And that process carries over right into reentry, right back into the community. A strategy for connecting them to services outside of the community. So some of that work had already been started in Washtenaw County, and that millage really positions us to now move further upstream. Quite frankly, Kevin's Law or court-ordered outpatient treatment really is a key component of that. Now, if we can educate the community to leverage that tool, I think it positions us to be even more impactful.
And Kevin, when you see it from the clinical side again, what kind of outcomes are you seeing for people who have benefited from Kevin's Law or ALT?
Well, overall, for those individuals, it improves their quality of life. It keeps them out of the criminal justice or judicial system. It allows them to manage their own civil liberties. It allows them to have a job, go to school, continue work and life with their families in the community. And again, it's an overall benefit to the individual and to the community at large. So I only see positive opportunities that ALT presents us with.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today on My Healthy Mind. You've educated us, you've given us a wealth of information about Kevin's Law, ALT, and we really appreciate you for it.
Well, thank you for having us.
Thank you.
And if you'd like to learn or read about this topic or any topic regarding mental health, please visit us on our website at myhealthymind.com, on Twitter at myhealthymind, or on Facebook. We appreciate you tuning in to My Healthy Mind, and we will see you next week. Let's talk about it.
It's really quite simple. If a family member has a loved one who has a mental illness who cannot help themselves, particularly if they become dangerous, they can go to court, file a petition, and get help. It is the law.
Reach out to NAMI of Michigan or any community mental health service provider and take charge. Kevin's Law. It's the law in the state of Michigan.